is Louise, and I'm going to be talking with you about Dr. Patricia Churchland. She's a neurophilosophy pioneer, and she recently retired from 40 years teaching philosophy and being the chair of the philosophy department at UC San Diego. And her recent book was Braintrust, What Neuroscience Tells Us About Morality. So this is the agenda. We're going to talk with her about who she is, and then going down to neurons. We're going to talk about a little animal called a vole. I don't know if you've heard of them. We're going to talk about oxytocin, which is a hormone. We're going to talk about the relationship between attachment and morality. We're going to talk about the relationship between caring and cooperative behavior. We're going to talk about what morality is and isn't, what is a human social life, and then we're going to talk about a part of the brain called the insula, or the insular cortex. So Dr. Churchland was, in 1986, she published the book called Neurophilosophy. She was the pioneer in that field. She's kind of at the respect level of Daniel Dennett in the world of philosophy. She's one of the big leaders in that world. She's been working all this time. She was the first person to say, if we're going to be talking about what we think with our brain, we need to know what the brain actually is. Get out of your armchair, philosophers, and get into the lab. So she also did a lot of training in neuroscience, and she's been working closely with several neuroscientists. Her belief is that biology is all about motivation and behavioral control. If you don't have any values, then you're not going to have any behavior, and then no genes are passed on. Also, she founded a movement called eliminative materialism, and what that field says is that most of the ways that we've begun to talk about the brain, that we're used to talking about the brain, are not relevant. Things like belief, like thought, like free will, like consciousness, have nothing to do with what really is going on in the brain. So we're going to have to leave behind that folk psychology and move towards learning to talk about things in a way that we know how they happen. So Braintrust is a genealogy of morals going back to our human and our non-human ancestors. We're going to look at what other reasons there were for morality and how they don't work, and how moral values ground a life that is a social life. So if neurons are involved in caring, how can they care? At the very basis, all animals, except for sponges, have some kind of neural system. Some of them are pretty simple, but even roundworms have a third of their cells are brain cells. So that's very, very important. And what that nervous system does is it interacts with the environment, eats from it, protects itself from it. So it's a constant interaction, and it needs to follow the most important drives. You need to survive, you need to eat, and you need to reproduce. So those are fundamental central drives. So how do you take that circuitry about caring for yourself and extend it to caring for others? Churchland had been wondering about this for a long time. Where is the evidence in the brain where we find out how this actually works? And it wasn't until this research that I'm going to tell you about that she found out, that's the beginning. So in addition to all other animals having a nervous system, mammals are also a different kind of strategy for evolution. In most other species, the animal is born pretty much ready formed and ready to go out there. They might need some food, but they don't need a lot of training. And the strategy with mammals is, let's build them a little bit more helpless when they're young, but they can learn. So this is a vole. It's a little rodent. And there are lots of different species of them, but the two ones of most interest to us are those that live on the prairie and those that live in the rocky cliffs. And there's very little difference between them except behaviorally. Prairie voles are very social. They mate for life, and the males help raise the offspring. almost exactly the same Montane voles. They're never bond, and the males don't help with raising the offspring. So what's the difference? And it turns out it's oxytocin receptors, and I'm going to tell you what that is. Okay, this is a cell, and the way messaging molecules work, and oxytocin is a messaging molecule, is the gland secretes it when there's a signal that says we need to have this thing happen, and it goes out and it finds cells where it fits in like a pocket. And then when it fits in like a pocket, that changes the shape of the receptor, and then that makes a change inside the cell that activates a pathway to make the change happen. So what are some ways? The messenger can trigger different effects in the cells. It can say, turn on this gene, turn off that gene, make more of this product, make less of this product. And there are ways to, for example, if you wanted to increase the effect of a substance, you can either put in more of it, or you could add more receptors so that they'll be able to grab every single bit of it that exists. You can treat it in a way that will make it hang around longer and protect it from being destroyed by the cell, or you can remove things that are blocking its activity. And in this case, what happened in the Prairie Voles is they added receptors. So they sliced their brains and looked at their brains, and they know that oxytocin is involved in labor, it's involved in nursing, and just before she was doing her research, they found out that if you put oxytocin into the brain of a ewe that has never known a male, it will still take on the maternal instincts. It will take on an orphaned lamb and act as if it were its mother. So that's why Sue Carter thought maybe it's oxytocin, so that's what she started testing for. And indeed, in two very important parts of the brain, the Prairie voles had lots more oxytocin receptors than the Montane voles did. And so, and those are in the part of the brain that's linked to liking something more, liking something less, or eating more food. And so they tried to block the oxytocin receptors in Prairie voles, and it turns out they stopped being monogamous, and the males stopped being interested in raising children, and even the females were less interested in raising children, raising pups. So David Hume, born just about 300 years ago, was wondering how there could be a thing in the brain that makes us moral. There must be something in there. He didn't know what it was, but that was the word they used for very small things that you can't see, was a germ. So is oxytocin that germ of human sentiment? There's a picture of the molecule right there. Is it the link? It's kind of like the first sign, but it's not the only thing. There's lots of other things involved, but now we know what kind of thing to look for. So vasopressin, which is a very much related signaling molecule, they have a similar history. They go back 750 million years. Birds have something like oxytocin called Ocytocin, and even little roundworms, C. elegans, have a thing called, that's something else, tocin, that's even in roundworms that have only 900 cells. They actually have a signaling molecule that's related to, if they have more of it, they tend to hang around with each other. If they have less of it, they tend to hang around alone in the water. Surprising. We also know about the neurotransmitters, dopamine and serotonin, they're involved, and also our endogenous opiates. So it turns out that being social has to do with extending your care for yourself to extending it to caring for others. It's the same kind of circuitry. And it's probably not one mechanism, it's probably not one behavior, it's probably going to be insanely complex. But I think it's going to be very interesting. Okay, Churchland proposes that attachment and morality are just 2 points on the same spectrum of actions. Attachment where they are less serious consequences, and morality when they're more serious. For example, not putting the top back on the toothpaste tube, for example, or murder. And what she believes is that morality is a constraint satisfaction process. Just like everything we decide is a constraint satisfaction process. I want this, and I want that, and I want this other thing, and I don't want that to happen. So I'll be willing to tolerate a little bit of this and some of that, and how can I get most of what I want and have all of them covered? Morality is the same kind of thing. And she says that caring is the thing that gives rise to cooperative behavior. So first, you have to be a being that wants to survive. We all are. And then they believe how it may have happened was that the animal would protect its territory from others, and then so it would have feeling for its territory, and then it would have feeling for its eggs or its young, and then that triggered that same kind of thing to extend beyond that, and then from maternal care to mating, and then wider and wider circles of caring. This, when I talk about being complicated, this is the pathway and all the genes and so on that are involved just in the biological clock. So this is much more important, so it's going to be much more complicated. Also, one of the things she wanted to point out was we don't have a wooden boat building gene. People everywhere who live near water and have trees build boats, but we don't have a boat building gene. It's a problem solving technique. We don't have a truth telling gene either. Morality isn't that way. Next. So what is truth telling? People say, oh, it's a virtue, it's something we admire, something we strive for. And actually, just because something is universal does not mean that there's an innate module for it, just like for boat building. Because we want to have accurate predictions, that's important for our survival. If people give you inaccurate information, you're going to make inaccurate predictions. That's not good for survival. So it's just in terms of human problem solving. Once you have intelligence and once you're able to be social with others, then truth-telling is a valuable strategy. So one of the things that Confucius and Aristotle agree on is that they think that there aren't absolute rules. It's not like never do this and always do this and never do that and always do that. It's very context sensitive. Certain things you can do here and you can't do there, depending on who you are. It's very complicated. It's not a set of rules. It's a kind of disposition, what you want to achieve, what your goals are. So there are lots of theories that abound. These are some older ones, but there's also lots of newer people coming up with ideas. We think about this, we think about that. Jonathan Haidt, for example, has the 5 moral foundations, purity and so forth. But Churchland feels that they're all interesting, but there's no data behind them. So these are the kind of things that we have in the whole human social life. We're great imitators, we learn, we develop a conscience based on approval and disapproval as we're growing up. And we're also able to have attribute mental states to people. We can kind of sense what they're doing, what they want, what they're going to think. That's called the theory of mind. So I was going to tell you about the brain part. So this is called the insula, or the insular cortex. So it's about here in your head, but it's hidden behind, as you can see, the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. So you have to pull those back to be able to see where it is. In this picture, that part in there is where the insular cortex is. So if you move this way, that away, so if you move those 2 parts away, like here, that's where it's found. And the insula is involved with a whole lot of things that relate to morality and atheism. You can go ahead and read these and look them up, but it has to do with interoceptive awareness, the emotional context of it. So your hand might feel something and go, 75 degrees, but your insula is the thing that's going to say, shit, pull your hand away. So it's got the emotional content. It does homeostasis, but not like the brainstem does, which is just breathing, but it says, how are we going to react to this situation? You start exercising, it's the one saying, okay, we're moving, let's get the heart rate up. It's involved in consciousness. We're not clear about how it is because we don't know what the heck consciousness is, really. but it's also involved in embodied cognition. So in other words, you might have this feeling, and the insula will say, oh, well, the hands are clenching, and the face is getting red, and all these things are happening. You're pissed. And it will tell you, and then you say, I'm pissed. But that's the part that tells you. Next. But wait, there's more. So it's also involved in laughter and crying. It's involved in empathy and trust and compassion related to morality. It's involved with uncertainty and disbelief, and yet also feeling in the presence of God. And it's related to conscious desires. So for example, that someone had an injury to that part of the brain, and he had never been able to kick the cigarette habit. He never smoked a cigarette again. It was just no big deal. Interestingly, it gets thicker in people who meditate often, who are paying attention to what they're thinking a lot. Intriguing. It has to do with salience. Salience means what's significant here. In this party, you are going to pay attention to that person telling a boring story or that lady who's screaming over there. So that's what salience is about. In your body, do you pay attention to that little scratch on your leg or this thing that's burning in your hair? Selective attention is also important. When you're, for example, studying or planning something, you want to have a certain amount of arousal, so you're interested, but you don't want to get so aroused that you're anxious, so you kind of keep it between those two. That's what the insula does also. So as more in terms of summary, morality is not a thing that's done as a rule. It's something that comes from us. Churchland talks about how 20th century moral philosophers of all stripes have been trying to go, what are the universal rules? What's the underlying foundation? What's the thing that we all share? And there isn't one, because that's not where morality is. Morality is not out there. Morality is not disembodied. There's not rules. There's no procedures. There's no categories. But we can tell right from wrong. They don't have to appeal to some yet deeper law or some foundational thing. It's rooted in our emotions. It's rooted in our passion. It's rooted in our social habits. Reason does not create values. It shapes itself around values and takes them in a new direction. So one of the things she's concerned about is that people say, well, rules and their conscious application are definitive of morality. That's what some people define morality as. But if they are, and then read the prior language, then humans are the only organisms with morality. But we can see in our simian cousins that they have morality as well. Even the golden rule has flaws. You don't always want somebody to do to you what they would like to do themselves, but some of the things they like to do themselves, you really don't want to have happen to you. So we were talking about Kant. He was talking about the categorical imperative. You can look him up if you want to. I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but he just basically said morality is an absolute duty. There are certain things that you must do, and you do them because it's a thing you're supposed to do, not because of the action outcome. That you're not supposed to lie, no matter what, just because lying is bad, not because of any consequence. But Jeremy Bentham was a philosopher who focused on more consequentialism, greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Eudaimonia is a Greek word for flourishing or well-being or happiness. Sam Harris is kind of more in this camp. Patricia Churchland believes that is not sufficient. There's been lots of talk about why that's too simplistic a thing. Ideally, if we could find out how something that I do is going to affect each and every one of you, and I can actually know that, and then I can decide what I'm going to do, that could work. But we can't know what's going to be the consequence, and so we have to deal with uncertainty, and we have to have another way to go about it. And then I'm just talking, she talks about some other things, but she basically said, whatever makes something good is rooted in the nature of humans and the society we make, not in the nature of the gods we invent. Any questions?
So discussions are fantastic. Let's do some Q&A. But we had some issues last time because the people in the front can't see people in the back who've had their hands up for like forever to just jump in. So let's just do the old, please put your hand up if you have a question, and we'll just kind of, point and do it in order. Otherwise, the people up front just kind of take it all. And yeah, we'll repeat the question so everybody can hear it.
Okay. So any questions? Yes, Peter.
Yeah. I heard something was on Radiolab, actually, on NPR.
Uh-huh.
That there was people given two scenarios where you push a guy off a cliff, save 3 of the people's lives, or you throw a switch so the train hits one person instead of 3.
The trolley problem.
Is that the insula that makes that decision not to push the guy off the cliff?
Actually, it turns out there's 2 different parts of the brain. If you, everybody here has heard about the trolley problem?
No.
Okay. So I'm going to do it really, really quick, and it's a very interesting test of how people respond to things. Imagine that you're standing and there's a trolley going by, and you realize that it's heading for those 5 people over there that you can't yell at and who aren't aware of the trolley and will be hit and killed by the trolley. But you realize, you happen to know, the scenario says you just know that this switch beside you, if you push it, it'll go down another track. If it goes down that track, there's one person there who you can't yell at. They can't hear you. They can't hear the trolley coming. So that person will die. Would you throw the switch? So quick show of hands, who would throw the switch? Okay. So about 80% of people tend to throw the switch in that case. All right, now second thing, you have a trolley that's going down the track. There's 5 people there that you can't reach, you can't talk to, and they're unaware, and they can't see the trolley, and they're going to die. And you're standing by a footbridge that goes over the track. And standing on the footbridge is a very, very large person. And you know, because you're an engineer or something, that if you push him off onto the track, that the trolley will kill him, but it will be able to stop the trolley and the 5 people will be saved. Would you throw the guy off the footbridge?
Part of it is you can't jump. You're tied down so you can't jump.
Yeah, you can't
You
jump.
can't sacrifice yourself.
Yeah, and
You have to sacrifice
you're too small, you wouldn't be able to stop the trolley anyway. So you just sacrifice yourself.
So the math is the same. Kill one person to save 5.
Right. So it turns out, by the way, that about only 20% of people say that they would push the person off the footbridge. But if you ask a sociopath, they'll say, yeah, push him off. It's just calculation. So there's a lot involved with different parts of the brain are activated. There's a basic part that's activated when you do just the flipping the switch, but when you're actually touching a person, that involves another relationship part of the brain. They've done fMRIs. Yes,
So you were talking
Prairie.
earlier about these elements, oxytocin? Oxytocin?
Yeah.
That makes an animal want to, like, mother other people, or at least be concerned
It
with
can
other
in
people.
certain mammals, yeah, like the sheep.
With others if it's fine.
Yeah.
Is this something that's an actual element that you could inject?
You
into
can't
someone
inject it, but you can give it as a nose spray. But you can't inject it because it won't go past the blood-brain barrier, but you can use it as a nose spray.
Could something like that be used as a treatment for someone who is otherwise a sociopath?
Well, unfortunately, what happens is they don't,
The desire to
we think
help others.
that maybe that they don't have the receptors, so you could put a bunch of oxytocin in, but there's nothing there to grab it and bring it into the cell or cause the consequence.
So their brains are already missing whatever would use it.
Yeah, and besides, it's a short-acting molecule, so it only acts for about 15, 30 minutes, depending. But they've done tests of people, and if you're playing a trust game and you take the spray that actually is oxytocin, not the placebo, you're much more likely to be trusting that the other person's going to be fair to you. Whether or not they really are, you're going to change how much you trust.
But there's a medication, oxytocin, for pain.
Yeah, it's also used in childbirth, so it helps speed delivery, so it can be used to induce labor or to speed up a labor that's going too long. It's also used for nursing. People call it a love molecule because, again, you feel more friendly and trusting around people if you just take a little sniff. Interesting.
But pain medication, the oxytocin is a pain medication.
I don't know if it's a pain. Oh, that's oxycodone. I think that's something else. Yeah. Yes, Dana.
Does progesterone have anything to do with it? Because I know they discovered when we cry out of sadness, the tears have progesterone in it. So how does that relate to oxytocin?
I'm not that familiar with it, but it is in the field of neuroendocrinology, which is part of neuroscience, which they're trying to study because it is related, because it is a hormone, and oxytocin is a hormone. Yes?
This thing you read that the affected feelings from this oxytocin, how do they measure it, you know?
How do they measure what?
Like if these receptors are connected to, let's say, arousal, or trust, how do they measure it?
Oh, well, that's what they did with the voles. But nature had done the experiment already. These voles here mated for life, and the males helped raise the young. And these voles over here were promiscuous, never bonded, and the males didn't help raise the young. There was a difference between them. And if you block that particular hormone in the prairie voles, they become promiscuous. They don't care about raising their cubs. So it's that in addition to being able to see that there's lots more receptors, you can see in action. You can make it stop. Oh, yes.
Actually,
Okay. Hey, Joel.
Yeah. Hi, Louise. Can you tell us all a little bit about the effect that things like alcohol and drugs have on these parts of the brain?
They work.
What works, the brain or the alcohol?
It all works together.
But what is, again, it is true that if you're an alcoholic and you get a certain kind of injury to that part of the brain, you may have no problem with ever feeling like you need to take a drink again. Same with drugs. They don't know how to do it, by surgery yet. We have no idea how the thing really works. It's much more in its infancy, but it could come at some point. Okay, yes?
No, I was relaying for him.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I'm not seeing any more hands. All right. Oh, and I wanted to mention that Dr. Churchland was in the 3 conferences called Beyond Belief in 2006, 2007, 2008, where they got people together who were the leading philosophers and the leading proponents of public science education to talk about how we're going forward in a secular world. And so you can see Dr. Churchland's talks in various places, but also particularly at Beyond Belief. Yes?
Will you make your text available to us to download it?
Yeah, it'll be at the website.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oxytocin is a medication.
No, oxycodone is a medication.
Oxytocin is also medication. Brand name is, because I've heard this word before.
Well, you can use it for inducing labor, for example, yeah.
Ocytocin, that's the brand name of Ocytocin.
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, oxytocin is a medication for make this dilate the cervix.
Dilate the cervix, yes, yes.
That's the oxytocin.
Yes, that's oxytocin, absolutely, yes.
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 And oxytocin is the brand name.
Uh-huh.
I've heard of oxytocin is medication.
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
For those purposes, yeah. And it also can help with lactation. So if a woman's having a hard time getting milk going, she can take oxytocin and that'll help the milk go down.
All right, thanks, Louise.